Welcome back. Honestman here with Sherry Potter to take a deep dive into mages, destruction mages in particular. Now, to begin, we need to define our terms here, and a big part of why I think this is necessary is because there are a lot of terrible quote-unquote mage builds floating around out there. Builds, for example, that advocate things like martial weapons and armor, up to and including recommendations to wear heavy armor. Don't misunderstand, we will want to use a heavy helmet for reasons that will be obvious, but if you see a build telling you to wear plate armor, then at minimum, we're not actually talking about a mage anymore. And at maximum, that person is giving you some truly awful advice. Similarly, when it comes to martial weapons, I see quote-unquote mage builds that advocate using a sword in one hand and magic in the other hand. And part of their justification will be something idiotic like using the sword when you're out of Magicka. Part of the problem with that reasoning is that not having magic in both hands literally cuts your ranged damage in half. Of course, just as often as not, the person who designed that crappy build will go on to say that you should also install a mod that quote-unquote fixes magic damage, completely oblivious to the fact that it's not the magic damage that's broken, it's their build. All of this is to say that I think the marketplace of Skyrim ideas has a dense population of really bad mage builds. So what is a mage? Let's level set on that. When we talk about an archetypal mage, we're talking about someone who typically wears cloth. And this should not be ambiguous or counterintuitive because a mage is most certainly not a tank. Mages are not frontline fighters, so they should have no need for armor. Similarly, mages are characterized by ranged damage. And because mages are not frontline fighters, and because mages excel at ranged spellcasting, in a game like Skyrim, which is to say a game that doesn't feature turn-based combat, there's a premium on mobility. So those are what I see as the primary characteristics of a mage. Damage comes exclusively from magic. Ranged combat is the optimal engagement distance. And because we want to maintain range, mobility is extremely important. Anyone who's doing things to counteract those characteristics is not actually playing a mage anymore. Now, if someone wants to be really obtuse, then they can try to argue that a quote-unquote red mage or a gish is a type of mage and they can use melee weapons, blah, blah, blah. If that's your goal, then this video isn't for you. Those are hybrids. When I talk about a mage in the context of Skyrim, I'm talking about a glass cannon that's going to use destruction magic to kill faster than they can be killed. This character does not use martial weapons, ever. This character wears cloth, with the sole exception being a damage-boosting helmet. This character doesn't need armor because they shouldn't be getting hit. So those are the ground rules. That's what I call a mage. With that out of the way, let's talk about our mage build. First and foremost, something that I've preached in my skill tree episode and in my optimized playthrough is focus. Enemies in Skyrim scale based on your character level. So our greatest combat effectiveness is achieved when we focus our build to the greatest degree possible on combat skills. Furthermore, the fewer combat skills we employ, the better. This is especially true for mages because mages are inferior to martial builds at high character levels. Martial builds, as I demonstrated in my optimized playthrough, can utilize the crafting system to achieve damage numbers that are through the roof. Mages, on the other hand, are much more limited in what they can do to increase the damage of their spells. Part of this is because, unlike martial weapon skills, increasing your skill level in destruction does not increase your damage. It instead decreases magic costs. Certainly, increasing your skill level increases damage indirectly because you gain access to better perks and higher level spells, but the skill level itself does not affect damage. On top of that, you can't use enchanting or smithing to increase your spell damage output. so our tools are much more limited as a mage. Now, the good news, in my view, is that mages are much more powerful than martial fighters at low to medium character levels. In very general terms, I would define that as character levels less than 40. In addition, we can achieve our sort of end game build as a mage much earlier than that. Our goal here is to basically have a finished build in the early to mid 20s. That's advantageous because we'll be well short of the point where most enemies stop scaling. Most enemies max out in the level 45 to 54 range. So if we can finish our build prior to that, we'll have an advantage relative to the enemy growth curve. So all of this is to say that I think the key to building a powerful mage is to stay very focused in our concept. That means we really only care about two skills, destruction and enchanting. For everything else, we're either not using it at all, or we're actively trying to minimize it, within reason. I think speech is perhaps the only exception where we are going to gain some skill levels there, just as a consequence of buying and selling. Now, when we talk about destruction, the key word continues to be focus. Specifically, we're going to be best served by focusing on a single element. That could hypothetically change once our build is complete, but I don't think it should because one of the elements is clearly better than the rest, and that element is shock. If you see a mage build where they try to tell you that flame is the best element, you should ignore that person, and they should feel bad for giving people such shitty advice. But don't take my word for it. Let's analyze why shock is better than frost and flame, and if you still want to go a different direction, at least you'll understand the trade-offs. The first reason why shock is the best element is because nothing in the base game resists shock damage. Now, the expansions added some enemies that do resist shock, most notably Seekers, but overall, shock is still the least resisted element. This is important because a lot of the damage boost that we can bring to bear comes from these perks inside the destruction skill tree. And if you're staying focused in your build like I recommend, you're not going to have the points to spare to try to push all three of these simultaneously. And if you do, which is to say if you overlevel your character by at least 4 levels to have enough perk points to go around, I don't think the additional utility of hypothetically being able to switch between elements and target weaknesses, I don't think that offsets the fact that you've scaled up the enemies by 4 levels, or potentially caused enemies to sort of break into the next highest tier of enemy. So bottom line for me is I think it's much more effective to focus on the most effective element rather than to try to juggle elements looking for advantages. And as I said, shock is the least resisted, so I consider that to be the most effective overall. The second reason why shock is the best is because once we leave novice level spells behind, which will happen very quickly, the majority of destruction spells are projectiles. For flame and frost, those projectiles have a travel speed. You're lobbing a ball of magic at an enemy. For shock damage, on the other hand, the travel speed is functionally 0. Shock projectiles resolve instantly, so it's much easier to actually land your spells, especially when the target is moving. And in addition, your average damage per second is higher because your spells are reaching the enemies more quickly. The next reason why shock is the best is because it has the highest mana costs. That might sound counterintuitive. That might sound like a negative and not a positive, but it's actually a positive because destruction skill gain is based not on damage, but on the base cost of the spell. So Lightning Bolt, for example, is worth approximately 20% more skill gain than Firebolt because it costs approximately 20% more to cast. So that allows you to access stronger magic that much sooner. And access to stronger magic spells is our number one way of increasing damage output. Furthermore, you really shouldn't have problems with your mana pool for at least 4 reasons. If you're serious about playing a mage, then you should be playing a high elf, which means you'd have an extra 50 Magicka, starting with 150 total instead of 100 total. In addition, being a high elf gives you the Highborn ability, which causes rapid Magicka regeneration for 60 seconds. This practically negates Magicka for 1 encounter per day. Another reason you shouldn't be bottlenecking on Magicka is because Magicka potions are plentiful, and you should be using them as needed in the early game. In particular, this is because once your build is complete, which in this case is going to be in the early 20s, your Magicka costs are going to be 0. So don't hoard those potions, use them up. For all of those reasons, I think the higher base cost and faster skill gain of shock spells is an advantage. The fourth reason that shock is the best element is because it has the best capstone perk. Deep Freeze here is awful because many enemies, including dragons, are immune to paralysis. The fear effect on Intense Flames works much more often than paralysis, and dragons are not immune to this fear. But I still don't think it's good because I don't want enemies running away when they're under 20% health. Rather, I want them to die, and I want them to stay in formation for AoE attacks, not scatter to the wind. And I want to have the option of looting them. In addition, with the right build, you're not going to have trouble killing enemies, so you really don't need the crowd control aspects of either Deep Freeze or Intense Flames, not by the time you're able to actually unlock them. Speaking of not having trouble killing enemies, the correct way to read Disintegrate is every enemy has 15% less HP. If you're using shock damage and their health is under 15%, they get disintegrated. I'm not aware of anything that resists this effect. For those reasons, I think Disintegrate is clearly the best capstone perk. Reason number 5 why shock is the best element, and I admit this is a minor one, is because there are exactly 3 helmets in the game that increase elemental damage. 1 each for Flame, Frost, and Shock. Of those, I think that the Shock helmet is by far the easiest one to obtain, and the Flame helmet is by far the most difficult one to obtain. Last but not least, the final reason that I think Shock is the best element is because it has the best master level spell. Now, don't misunderstand, I think that all of the master level spells are trash. The problem is that their cast times are ridiculously long, which makes them almost completely impractical as far as I'm concerned. But I think Lightning Storm is the closest one to being viable, especially for gunning down dragons. Now, in terms of counterpoints, I think people get suckered in by the burn damage that you can get from flame spells. The problem with that is even if we're ignoring enemies that resist fire, the burn damage doesn't trump the value of Disintegrate. In addition, the burn damage just isn't significant enough because the raw numbers aren't big enough in my opinion, and in general terms, enemies should be dying too fast for the burn damage to add up. Part of that is Disintegrate, but part of that is the higher DPS from shock spells because of their instant travel speed. Now, certainly earlier in the game where enemies aren't dying as fast, you can get some value from burn, don't get me wrong. But I would still say that early in the game, when you are low level, it's all the more important to get to higher level quicker. So I think that puts the premium on shock spells in the early going, and then once you get to the late game, there's just no value in the burn anymore. Another hypothetical downside to shock spells is that they have a much shorter range than Flame and Frost. In my opinion, that's a complete non-issue. I think the effective range of shock spells is plenty good. Furthermore, the ranges at which it actually would be a problem are also the ranges, I would argue, at which you're most likely not hitting anything with a slow-moving flame or frost projectile. In short, Flame and Frost do have a non-zero advantage over shock when it comes to range, but I don't think it's a meaningful advantage in practical terms, and I definitely don't think it's enough to unseat shock as the best element. All of that said, you can certainly diversify your elements once your build is complete if you decide to push into the high 20s, low 30s, but shock's instant projectiles, combined with Disintegrate, in my opinion, means you shouldn't. Just stick with shock. Now that we have the goal established, which is to say that we're building a shock mage, how do we proceed? The short answer is that it's basically the same template, that I demonstrated in my optimized playthrough. Just skip the non-mage stuff and skip alchemy and smithing. That's going to significantly compress our timetable, which is part of how we're going to finish our build in the early 20s. To demonstrate that, I'm going to show a series of milestones for my mage build using Sherry Potter here. Just go through the usual motions in the early game. Obviously, we want the mage stone here for our mage build. Then go through Riverwood, retrieve the dragon stone from Bleak Falls Barrow, and get to Whiterun. Skip the companions. There's really no value there for a mage. You can get your foot in the door if you like and possibly circle back to them later on, but the companions are not critical path for a mage. You want to buy Lightning Bolt as soon as possible. Most likely that means from Farengar in Dragonkeep. Then we want to kill the dragon south of Whiterun and buy the house in Whiterun, possibly selling dragon bones and or scales to help finance that. Afterwards, we take trips to Windhelm, Winterhold, and Riften in order to begin the Dark Brotherhood questline, join the College of Winterhold, marry Lydia, and begin the Book of Love quest. The College of Winterhold should provide you with some serviceable novice-level destruction robes, or the cloth gear available from the Dark Brotherhood also has some decent starting robes. Checking in on our skills, the only skill that we want to level is Destruction. Pick the one lock in the opening sequence where you can get the mage gear from the torture cell. Other than that, I generally suggest not using lockpicking. In most cases, you'll be traveling with a follower, or at least that's what I'd suggest. So you can just have your follower open locked chests for you. Don't equip armor. You don't want to level armor skills, but moreover, you shouldn't be getting hit in the first place, so lack of armor should be a moot point. Keep enemies at range, and move when you need to move. I'd also avoid sneaking. Sneaking does not have the same tactical advantage for mages as it has for martial fighters, which is to say there's no sneak attack bonus for magic. Although I leaned heavily into training during my optimized playthrough, training isn't really a thing for this build. We'll do just a little bit of destruction training later on, but for most character levels, we're not going to be doing any training. In our destruction tree, our very first perk point goes into Novice Destruction. After that, we want Apprentice Destruction to reduce the casting cost of Lightning Bolt, and then Augmented Shock at level 30. So that's the first 3 perk points. Your 4th and 5th perk points should go into dual casting and impact. As a general rule, you should always have magic in both hands, but more specifically, dual casting is very quickly going to become a standard operating procedure, because combined with impact, it allows you to stun lock enemies. It also costs significantly more mana, so you'll need to be judicious and strategic about when you dual cast and when you do 2 single casts, 1 per hand. In the early game, you may want to alternate the 2, which is to say, dual cast to stun, then single, then dual cast to restun, repeat. Hopefully it shouldn't take too many more cycles than that before they're dead, but we're going to be getting over our head a little bit with a couple enemies. More on that later. Jumping ahead to character level 6 here, we completed the Book of Love quest, we joined the Thieves Guild, and we advanced the Dark Brotherhood questline to Morning Never Comes. The reason this milestone in Sherry Potter's journey is significant is because we've reached skill level 40 in Destruction. This is the point at which Chain Lightning will start to be available from vendors. In addition to being a damage upgrade over Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning is also a multi-target spell. So this is a big upgrade for us. Lightning Bolt will still be our primary spell for a good while, but we want to work towards Chain Lightning as our next step up. To that end, our first step is obviously to buy and learn the spell. Next, notice that even though we have access to Chain Lightning at skill level 40, we can't unlock Adept Destruction until skill level 50. And we definitely want that to help make Chain Lightning viable. for that reason, this is the point where you might want to consider a bit of training to help accelerate the trip from skill level 40 to skill level 50. In the playthrough that I'm showing here, I actually trained skill levels 39 and 40 prior to this point, and I'm going to subsequently train skill levels 44, 45, and 46. Obviously, this is going to be limited by how much cash you have to spare. Either way, this training is definitely optional. I'm trying to illustrate a bit of a power gamer approach to try to finish this build quickly, but you can certainly take a more scenic route if you prefer. We are now character level 8, and Sherry Potter is deep in the bowels of Raven Rock Mine in Solstheim. This location, as I covered in my optimized playthrough, is the site of a black book that we want, but it's also an extremely important location for our Shock Mage, which is why we're here so early. Before we get to that though, just catching up from our previous checkpoint, we started the Lost to the Ages quest. We also advanced the main quest line. If you at least get to the Greybeards and unlock the confrontation with Mirax cultists, then the trip to Solstheim is free. Otherwise it'll cost you a couple hundred gold. We also completed the Blood on the Ice quest in Windhelm. This is significant because it rewards you with the Necromancer's Amulet. This amulet is actually better for conjuration than destruction, but either way, it gives you plus 50 Magicka, which is going to help us for the next few levels. As for the matter at hand, there is a Dragon Priest down here who has a helmet, which is going to improve our shock damage. So that, obviously, is very desirable. Now, I'm obviously not here because this is a difficult encounter. It's actually the exact opposite. This encounter is kind of dead simple because all he does is wards. He will electrocute you if you touch him, however, so be aware of that. He's not harmless, but as long as you're operating at range, this is just a battle of attrition. What I would recommend, however, is popping a potion of water walking if you manage to have one. So I'm going to do that here. And then what we can do is just try to push him back a bit towards Lydia, so you can help us out a little more. Yep, I see there he just staggered a bit. So if we can just double cast and keep pushing him to get him grounded a little, then potentially Lydia can close the distance and get into melee. There we go, now he's on land. And as I said, this is a bit of a war of attrition, but you're really totally safe as long as you don't get right up into melee. And you can even pop your Highborn ability here for Magicka regen to help accelerate the process. However you want to do it. But I'm going to fast forward to that point because this takes a really long time. And here we are, our new headpiece in hand, which gives us a 25% damage bonus to our shock spells, as well as 50% shock resistance, which is nice. Unfortunately, it is heavy armor, which isn't ideal, but those are the breaks. It's still the best headgear available for us because of the damage boost. I'll also quickly note our destruction skill level here is 51, so we've been able to unlock Adept Destruction to help with our Chain Lightning spell cost. Now, the next order of business, and we're still immediately after that priest fight, immediately after getting the mask, is this black book, which I'm going to demonstrate. At this point in our progression, we're a bit overmatched in here, quite frankly. The Seekers resist shock, and the Lurkers are just really strong. We will be able to overpower these guys in time, but we aren't quite there yet. The good news, however, is that we don't have to be there yet. We can just run. So that's what I'm trying to demonstrate here, how to get through here safe as a low-level character, but still gobbling up treasures as we go. This place, of course, is good for gems as well as spell scrolls and sometimes skill or spell books. And I just want to sprint through. I do have some Dark Brotherhood gear on. I have the Shrouded Shoes, which has Muffle. And I also have the Shrouded Hood, which I think is 25% sneak bonus, which is going to be highly relevant in a second. There is a skill book there. I'm not going to pick it up. Don't want it. And we just want to kind of tantalize the lurker up here a little bit, being very careful. because he will one-shot us pretty easily. But we just want to get a little distance there to help us evade him. And then we get up here. And now we are into sneak mode. And see what we have here. Oh, that's kind of nice, actually. A few goodies. And this isn't really necessary, but I'm going to pop this Potion of Light Feet, which is just a 10% sneak bonus. If you have better, definitely go for it. If you don't, you probably don't need it, like I said. And we just want to break line of sight with the lurker. And if you manage to establish enough distance as you ran across the room, he should lose track of us. While he's thinking about it, yeah, the eye is closing. Yeah, he's going to lose track of us. Now, this black book, when we came through for our optimized playthrough with our martial character, the real draw here was Scholar's Insight, which gives you the extra skill point for reading a skill book. And definitely we do want that. That's part of why we are here. But the more important value for a mage, for a destruction mage, is actually Companion's Insight. Companion's Insight makes it so that your spells don't damage your followers, which is really important because we just picked up our AoE, right? We just picked up Chain Lightning. So no matter which element you're in, you're going to have an AoE, and you don't want to kill your follower. So Companion's Insight is super nice. And while I was monologuing that, we officially lost our lurker friend, which means we can leave. Otherwise, trying to exit the book here to go back to Solstheim, if you are actively engaged, you can't leave. So, just need to do a little bit of sneakiness in that section. Jumping ahead now, while you are in Solstheim, however, do pick up the Sallow Regent Black Book. Just like with the one that I demonstrated, you can run your way through there. You don't have to kill those guys. The dungeon that holds the Sallow Regent Black Book also features another Dragon Priest, which might be more than you can handle right now, but that's okay. You don't actually have to fight him. You can just quickly engage the Black Book and then get out of there. It's also important to note that we began the Unearthed quest while in Solstheim, so starting to sink some money into that with Rallis. Right now, though, we are back in Skyrim at the Ethereum Forge, which is the conclusion of the Lost to the Ages quest. We aren't going to get nearly as much value out of this quest as we received in the optimized playthrough, but it's still going to provide some value, and it gives us something to do to help subsidize the excavation costs of the Unearthed quest. All of that said, it's time for the big showdown here, so I wanted to show my approach, if for no other reason, just to prove that you can do this as a level 10 mage. Now, the stairs that you come down here are going to collapse, or recede is maybe the better word, after you turn off the steam valves and aggro the enemies. So the approach here is to use that as a funnel. Where are the enemies? There we go. And there the stairs go down. So we're going to get Lydia back here. And our buddy, our ghost pal, should be with us as well. But she'll catch up. There she is. And we just have spiders. And I'm rocking the Chain Lightning. And thanks to Companion's Insight, I don't have to worry about friendly fire here at all. Oh, and we just got Destruction level 60, which is a very important milestone, because that means we can put another rank into Augmented Shock, which is great. Anything that boosts damage. And part of the value of staying back in this little cubby is to keep your companions out of the steam vents, which Lydia is doing a terrible job at the moment. But in theory, that's what we're trying to do. And we're doing pretty good here. I'm getting a little low on Magicka, but I'm not terribly concerned. Our companions are doing great. I do have Highborn online, which I will engage, but not yet. Not for the scrubs here. We're going to wait for the big guy. Speaking of which, there he is. So we're going to shut the steam off. The corridor there doesn't work quite as well with this guy because your companions are going to want to run out to engage him. And, you know, the Forge Master, you just want to make sure you can double cast to stun him, of course, which is great. And you just want to be careful that he doesn't catch you. The more your companions can hold aggro, the better. And to do them some favors, certainly try to keep the steam off. I don't know where Lydia is at. I lost track of her. Just being a champ. I'll help you get some stuns in. Oh, yeah, crushing him. Ooh. There we go. Easy. And hopefully that gives a taste for how much damage you can do as a mage as well. Again, we are character level 10. And I feel like we kind of made short work of him. Obviously, you need to be careful, right? Don't be reckless. But that's how we do it. Jumping ahead just one level here, we are now character level 11. And we are back in Solstheim at Bleak Barrow in order to complete the Unearthed quest. Now, as I mentioned in my optimized playthrough, you don't actually have to clear this. You can collect enough of Azadal's relics to receive his enchanting bonus without going through this whole thing. That said, Azadal's mask boosts fire damage. That's the mask that boosts fire damage. So I can imagine some mages being interested in that. So I'm going to demonstrate, once again, my approach and also kind of show off the capabilities of a capable mage as I fry these guys so that we can get that mask. Before we confront Azadal, we definitely want to switch from the Ethereal Crown over to our Shock mask to maximize our damage. Other than that, there's nothing really crazy going on with my loadout. It's still just the Shrouded Shoes from the Dark Brotherhood, the Novice Robes from the College of Mages, the Necromancer Amulet I mentioned earlier, and I did pick up the Nightweaver's Band for advancing the Dark Brotherhood questline. This is just a 10% destruction reduction. So nothing really crazy. We have advanced to the point where Chain Lightning is sort of our staple spell. That allows us to burn down enemies very quickly, and usually the mana cost is not even a problem at this point. In this encounter, however, the mana cost definitely is an issue because we have a whole lot of enemies and a boss with a whole lot of HP. So I'm going to go with this filter of extra Magicka. I'm also going to give myself a filter of health for more HP. And let's do filter of lasting potency for more regeneration. And I'll go ahead and pop the Drought of Fire Resistance as well to help against Azadal's fire damage. And I'm also going to pop the Highborn ability to increase our regeneration more. Who is hitting me? We're basically pulling out all the stops. This is the most difficult fight relative to our character level that we are going to see. And certainly, if I was not being reckless, I would not even be engaging in this because we're going to get much stronger very soon. But just trying to demonstrate, especially for folks that are really dedicated to a Fire Mage path, the sooner you can get Azadal's Mask, the better. And just showing it can be done at a very high, a very low character level. And if we can stun lock him, that's great. but also very risky because you have to expose yourself. So I'm just going to hand grenade single cast Chain Lightning for the moment to see how we do. This guy's coming for us. Lydia's down. And just going to renew our buffs here a little, get our health back. I don't have any more fire resistance, but I think that's okay. He's close to done. We just can't get hit. That would be bad. Yeah, get him, Lydia. I am running out of mana. Let's pop some of these. That's what they're for. We're going to have infinite mana shortly here, so I'm not worried about losing potions. There we go. Got him. There's Azadal's mask. And that's everything. We are straight back home from Kilborn Barrow, still character level 11, and we've collected everything that we need to complete our mage build. So at this point, it's time to power level enchanting. I'm not going to repeat that entire process. Refer to episode 9 of my optimized playthrough if you want a more detailed look at taking enchanting to 100. I am going to disenchant my disenchantables, however, because that's super quick and it will give us some character levels to play with. I did curate this list for maximum XP gain, and certainly I have all of the appropriate boons and buffs in play to maximize my returns here. So let's see how we do. Okay, 58, but I have the enchanting gear on, so that's really 48. There we go. And the reason I wanted to do that is to illustrate that this is the point, character level 12, which is our 11th power-up, where we stop increasing Magicka. We are on the verge of no longer caring about destruction spell costs, so additional Magicka, as far as I'm concerned, is meaningless. Our first 10 level ups were into Magicka, but now we push health. And I'm going to continue to push health, probably to 200 or 250 or so, and then maybe consider pushing some stamina. Regardless, our immediate goal is to max out enchanting. So I'm going to enchant all of my jewelry and see how far I get. I'll also note that we are now at destruction level 65 here, which is a very significant milestone because that means the Thunderbolt spell is now available for sale from vendors. So do pick that up. That's basically our end game shock spell. And finally, here we are, character level 22. I ran out of steam with enchanting at skill level 75, so I spent some time advancing the main quest line, which was very easy. That earned me some additional materials to help get me to enchanting level 88 or so, and then I used skill books to get to 100, with the help of Scholar's Insight, of course. Also, in the process of advancing the main quest line, I was able to increase my destruction skill to level 70, which allowed me to unlock Disintegrate. That is the final point that we need into destruction. Do not get expert destruction or master destruction. Our spell costs right now, as I'm about to show, are 0. So there's absolutely no value in putting perk points into those two perks. So with my set of enchanted gear, thanks to max level enchanting here, the Thunderbolt spell, as well as Disintegrate, this build is officially complete. For my enchanted gear, certainly it starts with spell cost reduction. So we can see here on the chest piece, I have a 36% reduction for destruction spells. And then the necklace and ring also feature 36% reduction. So that takes us over 100%, which means our spells are free. In addition, we have 28% magic resist on the ring and necklace, as well as magic resistance from the Lord Stone. Combined with Agent of Mara, that puts us over the 85% cap for magic resistance. In addition, we have 54% poison resistance on the chest and 67% fire and frost resistance on the shoes. Do note that these shoes don't weigh anything. These are actually the party shoes that you get as a part of Diplomatic Immunity, which is a part of the main quest line. These are the only shoes in the game, to the best of my knowledge, which can be enchanted and don't weigh anything. Ultimately, that's probably not meaningful, but nevertheless, just trying to optimize for weight here as much as humanly possible. Also for defenses, don't forget about the 50% shock resistance on our mask. And finally, the gloves. You're not going to get a lot of value out of the gloves, quite frankly. I just threw Magicka on here, even though that's functionally meaningless to me since my spells are already free. And then some unarmed strike damage, just because I thought that was kind of fun. I'd be very surprised if you find any sort of enchantment that'll actually help you on your gloves. So you can go whatever direction you want there. Now, can we improve on this? Yes, we can improve on this. There's some room for improvement with our defensive enchantments, particularly our elemental defenses and our poison resistance. Is it worth it? No, I don't think it's worth it. We're level 22, and we're going to be blasting and disintegrating fools left and right. Increasing our character level is only going to increase enemy hit points. It's not going to increase our damage output. In other words, increasing our character level beyond this point is actually going to nerf this build. To be clear, that's not to say that you can't possibly increase your damage output. You can. And the way you would do that is with alchemy. You can find plus 50% destruction elixirs, which you could use to temporarily boost your damage output. In addition, if you were to max out alchemy and create a maxed out set of crafting gear, you'd be able to brew your own destruction potions, which would cap out at 218% destruction damage for 60 seconds. Now, in order to do that, we're probably talking about character level 33. So that's another 10 levels of enemy scaling. Do the potions put you ahead in the end? Absolutely they do. But the downside is that you're chugging potions all the time. For that reason, like I said earlier, I consider this build complete at level 22 here. Of course, the option is yours. If you don't mind hotkeying destruction potions, then definitely push alchemy. And if you choose to do that, this is what I'd aim for to upgrade your enchantments and maximize your defenses. All the while, remember, pushing those additional level ups into health or stamina because Magicka is still meaningless for us. So we now have 77% fire and frost resistance on the boots, and we shuffled our poison resistance over to the necklace for 62%. We are still netting out at 0 destruction cost thanks to double dipping on the robe here, 41 and 25%, combined with the same ring we had previously, which has 36%. We are still maxed on magic resistance, and you could probably shuffle this stuff around to open up an additional enchantment to augment shock resistance, but ultimately I just don't think that's necessary. Your mileage may vary, of course. And for the gloves, I just upgraded the same enchantments I had previously. Again, not a lot of value here as far as I'm concerned. Last but not least, I want to take a minute to talk about this heavy helmet. Now, only wearing a heavy helmet with cloth for the rest of your gear does not decrease your movement speed. Additional pieces of heavy armor do begin to decrease your movement speed, especially if using a heavy chest piece. This is because there seems to be weight thresholds, after which you begin to incur movement penalties. Therefore, as long as it's only the headpiece, there's no need to push the heavy armor skill in order to try to mitigate the movement penalty. So, jumping back over to our level 22 Sherry Potter here, there's really no incentive and payoff to trying to level up the heavy armor skill. Again, you shouldn't really be getting hit at all, as evidenced by my ranking here. I did take a couple of good whacks, and I think each one leveled me up a full rank in heavy armor. But may as well throw an extra point into Juggernaut. You're going to have a couple extra points at the end here. It'll give you a little bit of value. Other than that, I can't really recommend anything. I mean, maybe a point into Sneak isn't the worst thing to do, but I'm just not sneaking. I'm just running around melting fools. And there we go. I think I've said everything that I have to say about playing a mage in Skyrim. Overall, I think it's a very fun build, and it definitely feels stronger than any of my other builds. The only exception, of course, being our end game optimized martial fighter. But at all points prior to the final max crafting, max enchanting martial loadout, I'd say the mage has the better damage output. So I hope this has inspired you to try out a shock mage. In any event, that's going to be a wrap. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much. Please like and subscribe. This has been Honestman, and I'll see you next time.